Two elderly men were sitting in the nursing home garden when one looked at the other and said, "I know you. You were there in 1968. Robert Mitchell was 77 years old and had spent the last 2 years of his life at Pine Grove Nursing Home. His children visited once a month. The nurses treated him well, but nobody knew who he really was. Robert had never talked about the war. He had never mentioned those days in Vietnam. Until 75-year-old retired sailor Edward Thompson moved into the nursing home. When Edward noticed the faded tattoo on Robert's arm, a small ship silhouette, and asked him, "Were you in the Mekong Delta in 1968? The 50-year silence was broken. Welcome to the last stand. Do you have untold war stories in your family too? Share them in the comments. Robert Mitchell's life at Pine Grove Nursing Home was routine. He would wake up at 7 every morning, eat his breakfast quietly. He didn't talk much with the other elderly residents. Nurse Linda was always kind to him. "How are you today, Mr. Mitchell?" she would ask. Robert would just nod. His children, daughter Jennifer and son Michael, came once a month. The visits were short. "How are you doing, Dad?" "Fine. Do you need anything?" "No." And they would leave. Robert's room was simple and clean. A few old photos, a radio, and an old bag he never opened. Edward Thompson was 75 when he moved to Pine Grove. He had lost his wife. His children lived far away. But Edward was a talker. "Hello, neighbor," Edward said as he moved into the room next to Robert's. "I'm Edward Thompson. You are?" "Robert Mitchell," Robert said briefly. Edward was a retired teacher. He had taught history for years, and he loved to talk. "I was in Vietnam," Edward said one day at the dinner table. 67, 68, on the USS Colleton. Robert dropped his spoon. For the first time, he looked straight at Edward. Edward began to notice Robert's behaviors, how Robert's hands shook when he drank water, how he talked in his sleep during nightmares, how he tensed up when he heard helicopter sounds. "Are you a Vietnam veteran?" Edward asked one day. Robert turned his head. "Why do you ask?" "Just, there are some signs. I was there too." Robert stood up, walked quietly to his room. A week later, while sitting in the garden, Edward noticed the faded tattoo on Robert's arm. It was a small ship silhouette. "That tattoo," Edward said. "Riverboat?" Robert pulled his arm back. "It's just something old." "Were you in the Mekong Delta?" Edward asked quietly. Robert's face changed. Edward had asked the question no one had asked for 50 years. "Were you in the Mekong Delta in 1968? Edward repeated. Robert's eyes filled with tears. He lowered his head. "Yes," he said very quietly. "I was on the USS Colleton," Edward said. "We did river support operations. What ship were you on?" "PBR-47, Robert said, trembling. "Patrol Boat River." Edward held his breath. PBRs were the small patrol boats that did the most dangerous missions on the Mekong rivers. "How long?" Edward asked. 13 months, from late 1967 to early 1969. "Those were tough times," Edward said with understanding. Robert nodded. And for the first time, after 50 years, he began talking about Vietnam with someone. "I never told anyone," Robert said. "Even my kids don't know." "Why didn't you tell them?" Edward asked. Robert was silent for a long time. Then he began to speak. "Because I'm ashamed, because I wasn't a hero, because I lost my buddies, and because I was responsible for their deaths." Edward was shocked. "What do you mean?" "Friendly fire," Robert said painfully. "Our buddies died because of our mistake." And Robert began telling the story he had never told anyone for 50 years. "It was March 15, 1968, Robert said. "I was the engine sergeant on PBR-47, 4-man crew. Me, Captain Johnson, Gunner Martinez, and radio operator Williams. We were doing routine patrol duty in the Mekong Delta. There was Viet Cong activity in the area. That morning, we got a distress signal from a village. They said American soldiers were under siege." Robert's voice was shaking. "When we got there, we really saw soldiers under fire. We immediately opened support fire. But," Robert stopped. "But what?" Edward asked gently. "But they were American soldiers, Green Beret team wearing South Vietnamese uniforms. They were on a covert operation. 3 Green Beret soldiers died in the fire we opened." Robert said, crying. Captain Rodriguez, Sergeant Brown, and Private Wilson, all three were my age. Radio communication was broken. There was no coordination. We thought they were the enemy. They thought we were too. An investigation was done. Nobody was blamed. They called it a war accident. But I knew. I was the gunner. I gave the fire order. Edward listened quietly. Then something else happened, Robert said. A week later, there was a real Viet Cong attack in the same area. This time, the coordination was right. It was a real rescue operation. We saved 26 American soldiers that day. I got the Purple Heart. I got the Bronze Star. They called me a hero. Robert laughed bitterly. A hero? I was the guy who killed his buddies. I sent the medals home, never opened them, never even showed them to my kids. When I came back from Vietnam, everyone asked, "How was the war?" I said, "It went well." What else could I say? Edward was silent for a long time. Then he spoke. "Robert, I was there." Robert was surprised. "What do you mean?" March 15, 1968. I was the communications officer on USS Colleton. That day, I was monitoring your PBR-47's radio traffic. Robert's mouth fell open. I was the guy who experienced that confusion. Edward said, "Radio frequencies were mixed up. Intel coordination was broken. Multiple operations were happening in the same area. You were yelling friendly fire, ceasefire on that radio. I was trying to respond, confirmed, American forces in area, but the system was down. Robert," Edward said seriously, "that day wasn't your fault. It was a system failure, intelligence failure, communication breakdown. I read the after-action reports. You and your crew acted according to the rules. You stopped the friendly fire immediately, and a week later you saved 26 people. You've been feeling guilty about the wrong thing for 50 years. Robert began to cry. The 50-year burden was lifting from his shoulders. But they died. Robert said, "Yes, they died, and that's very sad, but it wasn't your fault. Where are those medals?" Edward asked. "In my room in the bag. I never opened them. Can we open them?" Robert hesitated. Then he nodded. They went to the room. Robert opened the old bag. Inside were the Purple Heart, Bronze Star, and Vietnam Service Medal, in boxes that were never opened. Edward looked respectfully. "These are honor medals, Robert. You earned them. Your children should know about these." Edward said, "How do I tell them? I hid it for 50 years. Tell them the truth. They'll understand." Robert called his daughter Jennifer. "Jennifer, can you come this weekend? I want to tell you something." Jennifer was surprised. Her father had never said anything like this. "Of course, Dad. Can I bring Michael too?" "Yes, I want to see both of you." When the weekend came, Jennifer and Michael came to Pine Grove. Robert took them to the garden. Edward was there too. "Kids," Robert said, "there's something I need to tell you. You never asked what I did in Vietnam, and I never told you, but it's time to tell you now." And Robert told the whole story. The friendly fire incident, the guilt, the medals, and Edward's testimony. Jennifer started crying. "Dad, why didn't you ever tell us?" "I was ashamed, sweetheart. I thought I wasn't a hero." Michael took his father's hand. "You're our hero, Dad. You always were." Edward made a suggestion. "Robert, this story should be recorded. You should go to Veteran Affairs, give your testimony." "Why?" "Because there are other veterans in the same situation, those experiencing friendly fire PTSD, those suffering survivor guilt. Your story could help them." Robert thought about it. "Maybe you're right." They went to Veteran Affairs. Robert gave his testimony. Edward also testified. A month later, a letter came from the Vietnam Veterans Association. They were inviting Robert for an honor ceremony. The ceremony was held in Pine Grove's large hall. The local newspaper covered it. Veteran Affairs representatives came. Robert Mitchell, the speaker said, "A hero who was silent for 50 years, who saved the lives of 26 American soldiers in the Mekong Delta in 1968, who received the Purple Heart and Bronze Star but never showed them to anyone. Today, we honor him, not just for his military service but for the burden he carried for 50 years. Because real heroes are sometimes most heroic when they suffer the most." Everyone in the hall stood up and applauded. Robert was wearing his medals for the first time. After the ceremony, Robert changed. He now talked with other elderly residents. He chatted with Edward every day. His children began visiting more often. "Dad, what other stories do you have?" they would ask. Robert started keeping a journal. "Edward," he said, "you were right. These stories should be told. There are other veterans here too," Edward said. "We could listen to their stories too." They formed a small veteran group at Pine Grove. They met once a week, sharing war memories. Robert Mitchell, at age 77, broke his 50-year silence. Thanks to his friend Edward Thompson, he learned the truth. He was a hero. He always was. If you enjoyed these powerful stories, don't forget to subscribe to the Last Stand channel. These stories are shared daily. Robert still lives at Pine Grove today. But he's no longer silent. Every day he tells a new veteran story. Because he realized that real heroes are people who give hope to others by sharing their stories. And Edward Thompson? He's still by Robert's side. Two old sailors, two close friends, who met after 50 years, who lightened a 50-year burden together. Because some stories wait to be told, and some heroes discover their true heroism when they're ready to tell their stories.